Now, colour and colour space is a huge topic and is without doubt one of the biggest causes of doubt, confusion and opinion when it comes to ProPhoto RGB versus Adobe RGB, particularly when editing and printing images. So in this video, I want to share part of a conversation I had with Dr. Chris Bai, a world-leading authority on colour. He's also Vice Chair of the ICC, the International Colour Consortium, Chair of the Display Working Group at the ICC, and also the Senior Colour Expert and Manager of the Colour Technology Lab at BenQ. And by the end of this short conversation, I guarantee you'll have a much better understanding of what ProPhoto RGB colour space is and why biggest isn't necessarily best.
This kind of leads on then, because I noticed when I said the colour spaces that we talk about, you were fine when I said sRGB and Adobe, right. But the minute I said ProPhoto, there was a reaction. Okay, yes. Now I've got my thoughts on it, which are not going to be yours, I guess. Yeah. But you are, fine, you know. But and I work. No, let's just say my main editing software, initially software where I do my raw conversions and stuff like that, is Lightroom. Okay. Now Lightroom's colour space is set to ProPhoto. Right. So then I send it into Photoshop, and this is where you're going to get, so many people say, what's that little asterisk I see next to the file name when there's a colour space mismatch?
Yes.
So if my Lightroom is set to ProPhoto, because I guess Adobe is saying, look, this is a huge colour space, you don't want to miss out on anything, why wouldn't we work in ProPhoto? Or why? Or should we? I don't know, should we?
Right. Okay, there are arguments for this, and this has been going on for a while. And okay, I'm not taking any sides. Okay, I'm just saying out what I do. Okay, in my workflow. Okay, may not be the best workflow out there, but it works for me. Okay, I don't work for ProPhoto for some reasons. Okay, the first reason is ProPhoto is a theoretical color space. It's so huge. It's actually larger than what our human can see.
Yes.
Okay. So it's good for one thing. It's good for it can enclose any color in the world. Okay. So there's no doubt that there's all the colors. It can be in ProPhoto color space, but the drawback is we can't visualize that color space on any device. There's no device which can represent that ProPhoto color space. Okay, so when you're actually retouching on your photos, right, what do you rely on? You rely on the monitor giving you a visual response on what you're working on, right? That's how you decided if I wanted to add more yellow, want to less saturate color like that, right? That's the monitor giving you response, right? And that's why you need to calibrate your monitors, right? So, but since there is no ProPhoto device out there, if you convert everything to ProPhoto, then how we show a ProPhoto image, there's no way to do that. So there must be a conversion from ProPhoto to whatever your device to, right? So that conversion is really important, right? If you have a good conversion algorithm, then you could preserve probably most of the colors you're looking at, right? But if that algorithm is not good, then you get clipped, right? Your colors will be like maybe more saturated color will be like clipped. You lose a lot of colors by then. And maybe you get artifacts. You maybe get we call contour in some gradations, right? These are the artifacts will be introduced in this conversion. So you may not see what you really wanted to see in this process, right? And we have no way to actually judge that algorithm because we never get to see what's really happening in ProPhoto, right? So that's my argument for not using a ProPhoto colors.
Yeah, I mean, already I'm kind of, as you're saying this, the logic is kind of sinking into my head thinking, you're right, there is absolutely no device that displays ProPhoto. Right. I remember I had, because I do a lot of printing, And I was telling people initially, and this is because you chop and change because you get all these kind of advice from all over the place. But I was using Adobe RGB for printing. And I can't remember the name of the person, but there was a comment that came in saying, you should be using ProPhoto. Your printer can print outside of the Adobe RGB color space. You're missing out on colors there. So you're not getting the best quality. And I was thinking, really?
No.
No.
So far, the printers out there, I actually haven't seen any printers who can print outside of Adobe RGB.
Is that right? Right. See, that's recorded.
Well, to my knowledge, knowledge, there might be some crazy printer out there, like maybe...
No, but we're talking like the regular kind of things. Like I've got a Canon Pro 300, pigment-based thing. It's a fantastic printer, but that's not one of these bizarre ones that can print something different than Adobe.
That's still under Adobe RGB.
That's really interesting.
So that's why, okay, back to the story, why there is Adobe RGB. Okay, that is because the sRGB color space is too small to enclose the printer profile, the printer color space.
Right.
Yes. So that's why if you look at sRGB monitor, there are colors that it cannot be reproduced. Like colors can be reproduced on a printer, but cannot be reproduced on the sRGB monitors. Okay. But so that's why Adobe, okay, the Photoshop company,
yes,
they designed this color space to be large enough to cover most of the printer color space. Okay. And then so the monitors can actually show the colors which the printers can't.
Right.
So that's why they call Adobe RGB.
Yeah.
That's why they recommend using Adobe RGB for soft proofing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm kind of freestyling now because as you're saying certain things, it's making me think of something else. Because when it comes to the printing, then you say that the printers can print up to Adobe RGB, and not that you're aware of can go beyond it, unless there's some obscure one that you've never heard of. Yeah. But we'll say that it's Adobe RGB. Now, a few years ago, I had my first exhibition, and the prints were really big. And it wasn't something that I could cater for at home, so I used a Pro Lab. Some friends have got a great company up in the north of England called Digital Lab, and they specify to send files to them as sRGB, and this is a Pro Printing Lab.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things going around in my head now, which there's obviously a very logical answer to. But if sRGB doesn't give the correct representation of skin tone, right, but they're printing in it, how on earth did my prints look so good for a start off? Because they were absolutely gorgeous.
Right.
And on the back of that, why would a Pro Lab be using the smaller color space for printing?
Okay, unfortunately, some of the lab, the printers, the capability is only sRGB. Okay, they never go beyond that. Okay, and secondly, because the printer itself, they're doing something to actually make your prints look prettier. So they actually do some algorithm to make the skin tone look prettier on the monitor. So that's why your prints turns out really good. Mm-hmm. Okay. So do you mind if I ask you a few more questions on that?
No, please.
So did they provide you with a printer profile?
No, not for those ones they did. No.
So what they did was probably they manually corrected for your photos,
mm-hmm,
okay, for your images to be printed on so the printouts will look good.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's what it would. Yeah. That's a standard practice.
Okay, that's interesting then. All right.
So just so you know, my workflow is to shoot in the RAW format. I edit those RAW images in Lightroom, which works in the ProPhoto RGB color space. However, Lightroom doesn't convert your files to that color space unless you choose to do so when exporting them. When I export from Lightroom into Photoshop for editing, I choose the Adobe RGB color space, which is the color space I also have Photoshop set to. And I also export and print images myself in Adobe RGB. But that's all for this video, so as always, I'd really appreciate a click on the like button if you've got something from it, and if you haven't yet, click on subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.